There's a lot of controversy surrounding millennials and the church. There's always a new article coming out about how millennials are leaving the church. There's always a new book coming out how to engage millennials or have millennial ministry. And on top of that, there's always this blame that seems to be going on. Millennials blaming the older generation and the older generation blaming the millennials. But what is really going on with millennials and the church? Hey guys, Sean from Empty Church here. It's nice to see you again. As always, this is where we make videos about faith and following Jesus. Why? Because there's 6 days between Sundays when the church buildings are usually empty. And we don't live in the church buildings, and neither do you. So let's sit down, relax, and have a conversation. About 2 months ago, a friend of mine contacted me on Facebook asking me for my opinion about an article, 12 Reasons Why Millennials Are Over Church by Sam Eaton. And initially I was going to shoot off a short shotgun answer, and halfway through I decided, I was like, I'm going to take some time and formulate an idea and give him a real response. Unfortunately, 2 months later, I had all but forgotten to give him a response. So, I wrote him a blog and I'm making him a video as an apology for taking so long to get back to him. At this point, you probably should go find the link in the show notes and read the article first, and then you can follow along with me as I kind of go over my perspectives on his 12 reasons. So take a moment right now. So reason number one is nobody's listening to us. Yes and no. I think that everyone kind of feels like no one else is listening to them, especially when we separate people into age group generations. Of course, the older generation doesn't think that the younger generation is listening, and of course, the younger generation doesn't think the older generation is listening. But what I do have to say is that I think both groups are more worried about being heard than actually listening to the other group. And that's a problem. If I'm not willing to listen to the older generation, how can I expect the older generation to want to listen to what I have to say? It's just a give and take type of thing. If there's not a conversation, a dialogue between the perspectives of both groups, then of course no one is listening. The second reason is that we're sick of hearing mission statements and vision statements. Okay, I am sick of hearing mission and vision statements, personally. But that's because I grew up in the church. And there's always a new hipster one that is coming out, probably from a mega church that the smaller churches are adopting. And that kind of bothers me, because I feel like we're more about having a cool vision statement, because a lot of them are pretty catchy, but then we're not actually doing anything about them. And Sam Eaton basically says that we already have a biblical vision statement, which is to essentially go and make disciples. And so we're having all these other Christian-y statements that, are they really all that important, or should we be focusing on what Jesus called to do? I can see what he means there. Just a quick side note though. Churches are organizations, and they do need a mission statement. Empty Church has the 6 days between Sundays when the church buildings are empty. And that is because we're focusing on wanting to have a weekly faith rather than just a 1 day a week faith. And that goes into the videos that we make, the blogs that we make, the podcasts that we record, and then the Sunday morning liturgy that we go through is all meant to have a weekly faith rather than just a 1 or 2 day a week faith. Number 3 is helping the poor isn't a priority. And this is really strange because for a long time, the church was the organization that helped the poor. They did so much more than the government ever did. But it's pretty much flip-flopped now. And the only time we hear about churches helping the poor is when it's a PR stunt. Eaton encourages us here to organize our church to find out what the needs of the community are and then bring everyone together to help serve those needs. It's all about creating a culture of servitude and generosity within our churches, and I completely agree with that. Number 4 is that we're tired of you blaming the culture. And this is something that the church does do. The church does blame the culture for a lot of things, which is really strange because the church is really quick to adapt things that they like from the culture and then condemn everything else. And it's a really strange mixture because who decides what's adaptable and who decides what is deplorable? I don't know who decides those things. I think that we have to use the Bible to be our moral compass and to know what God is telling us to do. The big problem is that the church wants to be affirmed and to be liked. And that puts us in a place where we're kind of hypocritical because we're saying all these things in the culture are bad, yet we're trying to be hip and cool in things that really don't matter. Number 5 is the "you can't sit with us" effect. And Eaton compares the church to the old movie Mean Girls, where popular girls excluded unpopular people. And I kind of agree with this. Churches can be really cliquey and can even have unofficial assigned seating where if you sit in someone's seat or pew, you kind of get kicked out. And that's kind of absurd, isn't it? The problem I have with totally disregarding groups that naturally form is that we naturally form them. That's not something that we really have control over. We just naturally organize into groups. That's not even churches, that's humanity in general. When I was at college, I saw groups form, I saw groups merge, I saw groups explode, and I kind of got this idea that groups of people are kind of like a molecule and atoms. Because depending on the molecule, they have so many open spaces. And we as people have so many open spaces. And so we naturally connect together and form molecules that work together. The problem is when a church is a molecule that no longer has any spaces open to allow more connections. And then we start to turn people away and we don't let them connect with our molecule as a church. And that is the problem, and that's the problem with cliquiness. But we can't just say that groups that come together that create close relationships are wrong or negative. It's only when those groups start being totally exclusive that they actually degrade and turn other people away. They essentially tell people, you can't sit with us and we don't want you to know who Jesus is. Number 6 is the distrust and misallocation of resources. And I hear the heart of this one. In the culture today, we see these megachurches that spend a lot of money on a lot of questionable things. And that makes us question, how is our money being used? But I want to raise another question. And this one is, what should the money be used for? And how do we decide it? The author, Eaton, says that we should have a lot of transparency with our money and that we should dive really deep into how the church's money is used. But I question this. At what point do we decide what is the best use? Because there's always something else that we could be using the money for. We'll talk about helping maybe a hurricane victim, but what about the homeless next door, or veterans, or immigrants, or there's always another people group that someone in the church has a heart for and thinks that the church's money should be going for. The biggest problem with money is that everyone wants to control it. Everyone wants power over it, and will fight to the death over it. And that's no different in church. I've watched churches split over what the money's being used for. I've seen churches split because certain people wanted a certain technology and the pastor said, we don't need something that expensive. And people left over it. And that's the problem. People always think that their cause or the thing that they want to spend the money on is the most worthwhile. And so we can argue to death over what's the most important, but where are we actually going to get? Because there's always something else that someone else thinks is more important. Number 7 is we want to be mentored and not preached at. And this is kind of funny because this is something that Empty Church is all about. Josh even wrote I don't even know how many blogs about having a mentoring relationship. Although we don't really have an official mentoring relationship, I always see Josh as a mentor to me as well as a friend. And then in the Empty Church liturgy, we have a time where someone preaches, and then we have a time of discussion. So it's not a monologue, it's a dialogue, and that goes hand in hand with being preached at versus a mentoring relationship. We all come together on Sunday mornings, and after someone brings a homily or the sermon, we discuss what has just been taught. And that's where this kind of mentoring happens, is through the free exchange of information and ideas. Number 8 is we want to feel valued. And everyone wants to feel valued. That's just a fact. And from the viewpoint of Eaton, it seems as if churches, at least from the Millennials' eyes, just want Millennials to be warm bodies in the church rather than actually contributing and interacting members of the church. This kind of goes along with a question I've been asked before. People have asked me, why did we start a church rather than join an already existing church? And I think it comes down to we didn't feel like someone would let us try what we are trying to do. And so we had to start what we wanted to do rather than join somebody else. What I think it ultimately comes down to is both generations aren't valuing the other. The younger generation wants to throw out everything that the older generation has been doing, and the older generation is resisting any change that the younger generation wants to do. And that still comes down to having the dialogue, having the exchange of ideas, and seeing what needs to change and what is actually important that we've been doing already. Number 9 is we want you to talk to us about controversial issues because no one is. And I kind of agree. There's a lot of things that are hidden within the church that are not talked about, that aren't appropriate. And I think that's absurd. The church is supposed to talk about or talk to everyday life. The thing that comes out to me the most is the whole idea of sex or porn, and that today it's everywhere. Sex and porn is everywhere, and the church still only just is like, oh, that's bad, and doesn't really talk about it at all. Just it should be in the confines of marriage, but it doesn't address the fact that from even before 13, people are seeing sexualized everything, and in the past people didn't deal with that as much. And so we're saying you can't masturbate, you can't look at porn, you can't have sex outside of marriage. all these can'ts about the sex things, but it doesn't say what you're supposed to do when you're just bombarded from every direction. Even hamburgers commercials are sexualized. And so we don't talk about what you're supposed to do in the meantime. Even Eaton in the article says that a full sex series isn't maybe the most appropriate for a sanctuary with families. And I ask, why not? Oftentimes, people might make the argument, well, that's for me to talk to my child about. And sure, I don't have children, but I just know that so many people never are talked to about it. Parents intend to, but by the time they do, it's way too late. And I think that's the big issue is people say, well, we can't start too early, but I don't know if we can start too early because such an early age, people are seeing these things, even in cartoons, the innuendos. In PG-13 movies, there's super implied sex, and it's just everywhere. You can be watching a children-friendly station and still have sexualized things being presented to children, and we're saying we want to wait. I don't think that's the right action. So I don't know if there's ever a too soon to talk to children about the correct ideas about sex, and then maybe start figuring out how to help people deal with the sexualized society in ways that can be healthy rather than detrimental to self-esteem and future relationships. Number 10 is the public perception. And unless you've been hiding under a rock, everyone knows that the world thinks badly of the church. The church is hypocritical to people. The church is greedy. The church isn't trying to help anyone. Those are all things that people think about the church. We're just here for money is a big thing. And that's really sad. That makes me very sad that the church is no longer a beacon of hope and love and generosity and helpfulness, but the perception is that we're hypocrites. I would rather people consider us fools, because they already think we're foolish, especially if they don't believe in religion. I'd rather they think us fools who follow our foolishness rather than hypocrites that don't even follow the foolishness that they claim to believe in. Number 11 is stop talking about us unless you're actually going to do something. And I see what the author is saying here. Oftentimes we have articles about how the millennials are leaving the church. We have articles about how millennials are lazy. And we have articles from millennials voicing, like this one is, voicing complaints against the church. But no one is really doing anything. We're just talking about it. I think there comes a point where we've flushed out a lot of the ideas about what's going on with millennials. Maybe it's time to act rather than just talking about it. And finally, number 12 is you're failing to adapt. And I see what he's saying here. I like that Eaton is challenging people to try and take some risks, especially from ideas of millennials. It makes me think of the old Magic School Bus quote, take risks, make mistakes, and get messy. Because that's what's gonna happen, or else we're gonna just die out because no one's actually changing anything. So let's take risks, make mistakes, and get messy. All in the name of following and obeying Jesus. My ultimate conclusion here is that I hear a lot of we's and you's. There's a disconnect, and that's the problem in my book, is that there's a disconnect between the two generations, and until we have a dialogue between both generations, we're just going to continue to talk about each other, and nothing's going to happen. There's not going to be any unity, and the millennials are going to keep leaving the church, and churches will fail to grow or reach anybody, and that will be the end, at least of churches as we know it. And so I think it's time that we sit down, have a dialogue, and stop having the we's and you's and start saying us together, 2 generations as one. So that's the end of this video. If you disagreed with me or you disagreed with my assessment of Sam Eaton's article, let me know in the comments. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you don't want to miss our future videos, hit the subscribe button. And if you want more ways to engage your faith on the 6 days between Sundays, check out our website at www.empty.church. And see you next video.